What happens when a peaceful family dares to stand against the most feared neighbor in the community? When quiet strength clashes with unchecked power, the results are explosive. This isn't just a neighborhood dispute, it's a story of justice, redemption, and transformation. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. He thought it was just another quiet Sunday. He had no idea a stranger would try to steal not just his peace, but his dignity. Michael Bennett sat back in his patio chair, a glass of iced tea in hand, as the laughter of his children echoed across the backyard. Marcus, 10, and Zoe, 8, splashed happily in the family's modest in-ground pool, their joy uninterrupted by the worries of the world. For Michael, this suburban afternoon in Ohio was exactly why he'd worked long nights and weekends, so his children could feel safe, free, and loved in their own home. That peace shattered with the creak of a latch. Without warning, a tall woman in oversized sunglasses and crisp white sandals pushed open the backyard gate and strutted onto the property like she was conducting an inspection. Her teenage son followed a few steps behind, silent but clearly embarrassed. "Excuse me," she said sharply, eyes locked on the pool as if it were trespassing on her existence. "Your children need to get out. My son wants to swim now." Michael blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "I'm sorry. They're unsupervised," she said, ignoring his presence. "That's a safety issue. And quite frankly, someone like you should know better." Michael stood slowly, putting down his glass with controlled calm. But inside, his blood stirred. It wasn't just her tone. It wasn't just the trespassing. It was the assumption, the unspoken but clear belief that this house, this pool, and this piece couldn't possibly belong to someone like him. "Ma'am," he said, "this is my home. And that's my pool." Karen, as the neighbors would later confirm her name, barely flinched. "I don't care whose name is on the deed. My son's on the swim team. He deserves time in the water more than this." She waved vaguely in the direction of Michael's children, who had stopped playing and were now wrapped in towels, confused and watching silently from the edge. Michael took a breath. His instinct screamed to shout, to demand she leave. But another part of him, the father, the protector, knew better. His children were watching. And he'd teach them something else instead, strength without shouting. "You need to leave," he said firmly. Karen scoffed, reaching into her purse. "Then I guess I'll let the police sort it out. You'll be sorry you didn't cooperate." As she dialed 911 and began painting a story about unattended minors and unfit supervision, Michael didn't panic. He reached into his own pocket and called his wife. Sandra Bennett, senior emergency dispatcher for the county, answered on the first ring. "Honey," he said, voice steady, "you won't believe this." Sandra listened without interruption as Michael calmly relayed what had just unfolded. She didn't need to ask who the woman was, she had handled dozens of similar 911 calls in her years as a dispatcher. They all had a certain pattern: concerned citizen, fear for safety, coded language that tried to sound neutral but wasn't. And more often than not, the person making the call looked a lot like Karen. "She's saying the children are unsupervised and she feels threatened?" Sandra asked, her voice level but with an edge of steel. Michael looked at Karen, who was still pacing in the backyard, loudly complaining into her phone. "Exactly that. Record it. I'm pulling the 911 call from this end. If she's exaggerating or misusing emergency services, it's going on record." Michael flipped on his phone's camera, aiming it carefully. Not to escalate, but to protect. Karen was in full performance mode now, voice trembling with feigned urgency as she spoke to the dispatcher. "They're acting aggressively, the man is towering over me. I don't feel safe at all." Michael didn't move an inch. He didn't even approach her. In the background, Marcus and Zoe sat wrapped in their towels, their once carefree afternoon now cloaked in confusion. "Daddy," Zoe whispered, "are we in trouble?" "No, baby," Michael said, without breaking his calm. We're just being watched unfairly. But we'll show them who we are, by staying true. At the dispatch center across town, Sandra was already speaking to Officer Ramirez, a veteran officer known for his level-headedness and integrity. She trusted him. Ramirez, it's Sandra. We've got a Karen situation. He groaned audibly. Again? Yeah. This one's personal. My husband and kids. She's trespassing, calling in false claims. I'm sending you body cam footage from his phone now. You know I'll handle it by the book. I know, Sandra replied, her voice softening. Just, be aware. She's the HOA treasurer, and she thinks that gives her authority she doesn't have. Back in the Bennett backyard, Karen ended her call with a dramatic sigh and folded her arms. The authorities are on their way. I hope you're ready for the consequences. Michael didn't respond. He sat back down in his chair, motioned for his kids to come sit beside him, and resumed sipping his iced tea. The silence unnerved her more than shouting ever could. 10 minutes later, the police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Officer Ramirez stepped out and took in the scene with one glance. He walked straight to Michael. Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett. Afternoon, officer. Karen rushed over, gesturing wildly. That's him. That's the man I was telling you about. His children were alone in the pool, and he confronted me aggressively when I asked them to leave. Ramirez turned to her slowly. Ma'am, are you aware that this is private property? Karen blinked. Excuse me. The Bennett family owns this home. This backyard. And this pool. You're trespassing. I'm the HOA treasurer, she snapped. That doesn't give you the right to enter someone's property without permission. Karen opened her mouth to argue again, but Ramirez held up a hand. Also, you called 911 and made claims that are directly contradicted by the footage I just reviewed from Mr. Bennett's phone. That's a misuse of emergency services. I'm going to need you to leave the premises immediately. Karen turned red. You're siding with them. I'm siding with the truth. As Karen stormed off, mumbling threats about escalating to the HOA board, Ramirez turned back to Michael. You did everything right. And I'm filing a full report, including your recording and the 911 call logs. This won't disappear quietly. Michael nodded, the weight on his shoulders a bit lighter now. I just want my kids to be able to swim in peace. Ramirez gave a small smile. They will. And people like her. Their time is running out. Sandra texted a few minutes later, footage uploaded. HOA board will see it. And I've already flagged Karen's name in the dispatcher log. Justice wasn't always fast. But this time, it had a head start. It didn't take long for the video to go viral. By the time Michael woke up the next morning, his inbox was overflowing. A neighbor had shared the video on a local community Facebook page with the caption, HOA Karen strikes again, but this time, she picked the wrong family. The video had already racked up over 30,000 views overnight. The footage was clear and damning. Karen's exaggerated claims, her unauthorized entry, the way she dismissed Michael and his children as if they were intruders rather than homeowners, it was all caught in crisp 1080p. And viewers weren't having it. Absolutely disgusting behavior. She should be the one arrested for trespassing. Respect to that dad. Calm, composed, protective. Michael scrolled through the comments with mixed feelings. Part of him was grateful for the public support. Another part hated that his children's peaceful afternoon had turned into viral content. But above all, he felt validated. The truth was out. And it had teeth. The local news picked it up next. Interviews followed. Michael declined most of them, but Sandra agreed to speak to one trusted journalist from Channel 7. The video speaks for itself, she told them. But what it doesn't show is how often things like this happen. Not every family has a camera ready. Not every child has a parent nearby who knows how to stay calm. In response, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. For the first time in years, they opened it to the public. The turnout was massive. Residents of all backgrounds packed the community center, some holding printed screenshots from the video, others wearing t-shirts that read, "Let Kids Swim." Karen arrived late and was immediately surrounded by a cold silence. Her usual allies shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. She no longer held the power of intimidation. Now, she just looked small. The board president, Eleanor Winslow, banged her gavel. "We're here to address the recent incident involving the misuse of HOA authority." Karen stood up, visibly shaking. "I was just trying to protect the children." "There were safety violations," Eleanor cut her off. "There was no violation. You entered private property. You lied on a 911 call. And now, the entire community is facing embarrassment because of your actions." Someone in the back shouted, "She's done this before." Another added, "This isn't just about Michael's family. It's a pattern." The meeting shifted from order to uproar. Testimonies poured in. Dozens of residents came forward. Karen had harassed teenagers for skateboarding. She had demanded elderly neighbors trim trees she didn't like. She had once called animal control because a family's dog barked too much during a barbecue. By the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. Karen was removed from the HOA board. As she walked out, head down, she passed Michael in the hallway. For the first time, she had no snide comment, no glare. Just silence. Michael turned to Sandra. "Do you think it's over?" She shrugged. "With people like her, it never really ends. But we made a dent." Later that night, Michael posted a message online, "To everyone who stood up, thank you. To those who stayed silent, now's the time to find your voice. Because dignity isn't something that should ever be up for debate. Not in this neighborhood. Not in this country." The comments lit up again. And for once, the internet felt like a community. Karen didn't leave her house for 3 days. The blinds stayed shut. The once meticulously manicured lawn now looked wild and neglected. Her white SUV, usually parked assertively on the curb like a neighborhood patrol car, hadn't moved since the HOA meeting. Meanwhile, Michael kept his schedule steady. Mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Midday check-ins with his children. Evening dinners with Sandra and her calming, ever-observant eyes. The world moved on, but something had shifted. The Bennetts were no longer a quiet family in the middle of the block. They were now a symbol of resilience, of decency, of boundaries pushed too far. It was a Wednesday when the unexpected happened. A soft knock at the front door. Michael opened it to find Karen, dressed in a beige cardigan, standing on his porch holding a small envelope and a Tupperware container. "I baked banana bread," she said. Michael blinked. The absurdity didn't even feel real. "I wanted to apologize," she added. Face to face. Sandra stepped forward from the hallway. "You can speak. But not on the porch. Let's keep this neutral." They met at the sidewalk, just between the two properties. Karen shifted uncomfortably. "I've been rethinking everything." "You had a lot of time to reflect," Michael said. "After years of intimidation." Karen winced. "I know I was wrong. I let assumptions guide me. And I forgot how to be a neighbor." Sandra spoke gently, but firmly. "It wasn't just about being a bad neighbor. You accused our children of things they didn't do. You weaponized fear." Karen's eyes welled. "I've signed up for a restorative justice session. With the Community Mediation Board. I also handed in my HOA membership. Voluntarily." I need to step back. I need to learn. There was a pause. The kind of silence that doesn't demand filling. Michael finally took the bread. Thank you. For this step. But it's just the beginning. Karen nodded. I know. That weekend, the community held a block gathering. Ironically, one originally organized by Karen years ago to boost HOA compliance. Now, it was transformed. Kids raced down sidewalks. A local band played under the maple trees. Michael stood behind the grill, flipping burgers while neighbors took turns thanking him. You didn't just stand up for your family, one said. You stood up for all of us. Sandra smiled. One moment. One voice. That's all it takes to change a tone. Karen came, too. She stayed on the edge, bringing no clipboard, no complaints. Just quiet eyes and a folding chair. She didn't speak much. But she listened. Sometimes, that's the start of healing. It had been exactly 1 month since the confrontation that changed everything. The neighborhood, once rigidly controlled by policies written in fine print, had begun to loosen. The invisible fences people lived behind weren't just about property lines anymore, they were about pride, prejudice, and perception. At the center of it all was the Bennett family. Michael resumed walking his kids to school each morning, a practice he'd quietly stopped after the incident. Now, neighbors waved. Some even walked with them. The children, once seen as outsiders by a few, were now recognized for what they always were, just kids with joyful energy and good hearts. Sandra began organizing weekend art sessions on the lawn. Neighbors of all backgrounds joined in, young, old, long-time residents, and newcomers. They painted birdhouses, tie-dyed t-shirts, and talked. Really talked. The biggest change, however, came from the HOA. Eleanor Winslow, the board president, kept her promise. A policy revision task force was formed, this time, open to all residents. Gone were the days of closed-door decisions and unchallengeable authority. Transparency became the new buzzword. Accountability followed close behind. Michael, at first hesitant, eventually agreed to serve on the task force. Not out of revenge, but responsibility. I'm not here to fight the HOA, he said at the first meeting. I'm here to help rebuild trust. Karen didn't attend that meeting. But she did something unexpected. She submitted a letter. It wasn't a defense. It was a confession. I let fear guide me. I mistook control for care. I confused uniformity with community. I'm sorry, not just to the Bennetts, but to every neighbor I've alienated over the years. The room went silent after the letter was read. Michael looked around and then said quietly, "That's a start." Weeks passed. The HOA rewrote its guidelines with input from residents. Children's play would no longer be policed unless there was genuine risk. Community events would prioritize connection over compliance. Conflict resolution would happen face-to-face, not through citations or threats. As fall approached, the Bennetts hosted a harvest potluck in their backyard. Karen came. She brought apple pie and a lawn chair. No clipboard. Michael greeted her warmly. Sandra offered her a plate. The children gave her cautious but polite smiles. They didn't forget. But they were willing to forgive. After sunset, lanterns lit the backyard. Music played softly. Michael raised a glass of cider and clinked it with Sandra's. To better neighbors, he said. She smiled. To a better neighborhood. And in the flickering light, among laughter and second chances, the Bennetts realized something profound. Justice isn't always loud. It isn't always fast. Sometimes, justice is a quiet afternoon where everyone is welcome, and no one is afraid. In life, justice doesn't always arrive with noise and flashing lights. Sometimes, it comes in quiet moments, through grace, courage, and the resolve to stand tall when it would be easier to walk away. The story of the Bennets reminds us that dignity is not measured by how loudly we speak, but by how calmly we respond when others try to strip it away. Michael didn't fight back with rage, he used patience, principle, and presence to let the truth rise above prejudice. Sandra didn't lash out, she stood steady, showing that strength and empathy can coexist. And perhaps most surprising of all, Karen's slow but honest reckoning shows that change, while difficult, is still possible. Even for those who have caused harm. Communities thrive not when rules dominate, but when neighbors listen, reflect, and reach across divides. In a world quick to judge based on appearance or assumptions, this story reminds us of the importance of humility, second chances, and the power of truly seeing one another. It's a story for every age, but especially meaningful to those who've lived long enough to know that forgiveness isn't weakness, and silence isn't surrender. Justice, at its best, restores what fear once broke, and builds something better in its place. If this story moved you, please show your support by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the bell so you don't miss future stories like this. And we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. Let's celebrate the power of community, no matter where we are.